Secondary storage is non-volatile memory used to hold data and programs permanently. Unlike RAM, it keeps its contents when the power is removed, which is the entire reason it exists, because everything in primary memory disappears the moment the machine is switched off. And remember the other half of the distinction from the last lesson. The CPU cannot access secondary storage directly. Data has to be copied into RAM before the processor can do anything with it. There are 3 technologies on the syllabus, and what makes them different is the physical thing being changed to record a bit. Magnetic storage changes magnetism. Optical storage changes how a surface reflects light. Solid-state storage traps an electrical charge. Every difference in speed, durability, and cost follows from those 3 physical facts, so it is worth knowing the mechanism rather than just the list. Magnetic storage means the hard disk drive. Inside are rigid disks called platters coated with a magnetic material spinning at high speed, typically 7,200 revolutions per minute. A red right head sits on the end of an actuator arm and moves in and out across the platter's surface as it spins beneath. The surface is divided into concentric circles called tracks, and each track is divided into sectors. To right, the head changes the magnetic polarity of tiny regions of the surface. One polarity represents a 1, the opposite represents a 0. To read, it detects those polarities as they pass underneath. Now notice what that description contains. Platters spinning, an arm moving, a head positioned. Those are moving parts, and everything about the hard disk's character follows from them. It is comparatively slow because the disk must physically rotate until the right sector arrives under the head. It is vulnerable to being dropped because a moving head very close to a spinning surface is not a robust arrangement, and it makes noise and consumes power turning the motor. What it gives you in exchange is a very large capacity for very little money. Optical storage uses a laser and the surface's reflectivity. Writing is done with a high-powered laser which burns tiny hollows into the reflective layer of the disk. Those hollows are called pits, and the untouched flat areas between them are called lands. The terminology matters because questions use both words. Reading is done with a low-powered laser, low-powered because it must not burn anything, just illuminate. And here is the step where answers most often go wrong, so let me walk it through carefully. Follow the light. First, the low-powered laser shines onto the spinning disk. Second, it strikes either a land or a pit. Third, and this is the physical fact everything rests on, a land is flat and reflects the light straight back towards the sensor, whereas a pit scatters the light away so that far less of it returns. Fourth, a photodiode sensor measures how much light came back, a strong reflection or a weak one. And fifth, that measurement is interpreted as a bit. A strong reflection from a land is read as a 1, a weak reflection from a pit is read as a 0. Now, the mistake to avoid. A pit is not a 0 because a pit is a hole, and a hole feels like nothing. The disk does not know what a hole means. It is a 0 because of what happens to the light. The pit scatters it, less returns, and the sensor reports a low reading which the drive interprets as 0. The reflection is the cause. The bit is the consequence. If you write that in the right order, you have described the mechanism, which is what the marks are for. And this also explains the capacities. A CD holds about 700 megabytes, a DVD about 4.7 gigabytes, a Blu-ray 25 gigabytes or more. Blu-ray holds most because it uses a blue laser, which has a shorter wavelength than the red laser in a CD or DVD, and a shorter wavelength can be focused onto a smaller spot, so the pits can be smaller and packed more densely into the same physical area. Solid-state storage is electronic, and it is the one with no moving parts at all. It is what is inside an SSD, a USB memory stick, and an SD card. It uses a grid of floating gate transistors, the word floating meaning the gate is electrically isolated, surrounded by insulator on every side. An electrical charge can be forced onto that gate, and because it is insulated, the charge stays there when the power is removed. That is what makes flash memory non-volatile, a trapped charge with nowhere to leak to. Whether a charge is present or absent determines the bit value. Compare that with DRAM from the last lesson, where the charge sits on a capacitor that leaks and needs refreshing thousands of times a second. Same idea, store a charge, but here it is trapped rather than merely held, and that single difference is volatile versus non-volatile. Because nothing moves, solid-state storage is far faster than a hard disk, since there is no waiting for a platter to rotate or a head to travel. It is silent, uses less power, and survives being dropped. The costs are that it is considerably more expensive per gigabyte, and that flash memory cells wear out after a large but finite number of write cycles. The page also distinguishes two kinds of flash, and it is worth a moment. NOR flash allows random access. Individual bytes can be read directly, and it reads very quickly, which makes it suitable for storing code that has to be executed in place. NAND flash accesses data in blocks or pages rather than individual bytes, writes and erases faster, and is much cheaper and denser. That density is why NAND is what is inside SSDs, memory cards, and USB sticks, where you are storing large files and reading them in blocks anyway. It is the same trade-off shape as SRAM against DRAM in the last lesson. The fine-grained, faster technology is used where precision access matters, and the cheaper, denser one is used where bulk capacity matters. So, how do you choose? Scenario questions in this area give you a situation and expect a justified choice, and the reasoning is nearly always about the mechanism. A laptop for a field engineer who travels, solid state because there are no moving parts to damage when it is knocked about, and the lower power draw extends battery life. A server storing many terabytes of archived video where cost per gigabyte dominates. Magnetic, because it is by far the cheapest per gigabyte and the access speed matters less for archived material. Distributing software or a film to people who may have no fast internet. Optical, because discs are cheap to mass produce, robust enough to post, and read-only versions cannot easily be altered. And notice that the read-only property, which sounds like a limitation, is exactly why optical is chosen for distribution. Justify from the named property, no moving parts, cost per gigabyte, portability, never by saying one is better. 4 things to take into the exam. First, describe the mechanism, not the object. For a hard disk, that means platters, a read-write head, tracks and sectors, and changing magnetic polarity. Second, for optical, get the direction of the explanation right. A land reflects light back to the sensor and reads as 1. A pit scatters the light and reads as 0. The reflection causes the bit. Third, for solid state, say that charge is trapped in floating gate transistors and that this is why it is non-volatile. And mention that there are no moving parts because almost every advantage it has traces to that. And fourth, when comparing them, use the named properties: capacity, cost per gigabyte, speed, durability, portability. Those are the axes the mark scheme is built on.